There's a moment, right before a trap springs, where the world goes silent. It's the breath before the snap. For months, I had been the mouse, and she, the cat. But on my wedding day, in front of 200 people who had just watched me promise my life to her son, I realized something. Sometimes, the most effective trap isn't made of steel. It's made of truth. And all you have to do is give your enemy the stage, hand them the microphone, and let them build their own cage. Word by painful word, my wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became a battlefield for my dignity. If you believe that justice isn't always about shouting the loudest, but about choosing the perfect moment to speak your truth, then you're in the right place. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I turned a public humiliation into a masterclass in quiet, calculated revenge. And if you appreciate a story where the bully finally gets what they deserve, consider liking this video and subscribing. You won't want to miss the fallout. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. It all began with a scrapbook. Not a digital Pinterest board, but a real, physical book with a faded velvet cover that I'd had since I was 10. It was filled with magazine clippings of dresses, pressed flowers from gardens I liked, and scribbled notes in the margins. Music must be strings. No DJ. Peonies. Always peonies. This book was the tangible form of a dream I had nurtured for 2 decades, a dream of a day that was less about the spectacle and more about the sacred promise of love, celebrated with the people who mattered most. When Michael proposed, it felt like the final, perfect picture was being pasted onto the last empty page. He was everything I had never dared to dream of. Kind, steady, with a laugh that could chase the clouds away. He saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he saw. When he slipped his grandmother's ring onto my finger under a star-dusted sky, I didn't just feel happy. I felt safe. I thought we were a team, a fortress of 2, ready to build a life together. I had no idea that the siege was about to begin, and the enemy was already inside the gates. Her name was Eleanor. The first time I met Michael's mother, it was at her home, a sprawling, impeccably decorated house in the wealthiest part of the city. Everything was cream, gold, and silent judgment. The air itself seemed expensive. Eleanor was tall and slender, dressed in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, did all the talking. They scanned me from head to toe, and I felt like a piece of merchandise being assessed for its value. And I suspected being found wanting. "Amelia," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Michael has told me so much about you." She drew out the "so," infusing it with a universe of meaning I couldn't quite decipher, but I knew it wasn't a compliment. Over lunch, served by a housekeeper who moved with practiced invisibility, the subtle digs began. They were like tiny, poison darts, so small you barely felt them break the skin. "Oh, you're a graphic designer? How creative," she said, the way one might talk about a child's finger painting. "It must be so fulfilling to work on your little projects." When I mentioned where I grew up, a modest, loving home in a quiet suburb, she nodded slowly. "Of course. Michael has always had a soft spot for simplicity." I tried to win her over. I complimented her home, her taste. I asked her about her charity work. She accepted the praise as her due, offering nothing in return. I left that day with a pit in my stomach, a cold, nervous knot that I couldn't explain. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. This was his mother. I just needed to try harder. Michael, bless his heart, was blissfully unaware. To him, his mother was just Mom. A little formal, perhaps a stickler for etiquette, but a loving mother nonetheless. "She just needs time to get to know you, Ames," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Once she sees how amazing you are, she'll love you." But as the wedding planning began, her formality sharpened into a weapon. The dream in my velvet-covered scrapbook began to be systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. First, it was the venue. We'd found a beautiful, rustic barn with ancient oak beams and sprawling fields. It was warm, intimate, and felt like us. When we showed Eleanor the pictures, she held the brochure between two perfectly manicured fingers, as if it were contaminated. "A barn?" she asked, a delicate eyebrow arched in disbelief. "Are you planning to have livestock as guests?" "Michael, darling, your wedding is a statement. It's the union of two families. It requires a certain level of decorum, not a hoedown," she suggested. And with Eleanor, suggestions were commands cloaked in politeness, a ballroom at a sterile, downtown hotel. It was cold, impersonal, and 5 times our budget. To keep the peace, we compromised on a botanical garden conservatory. It was beautiful, but it wasn't our barn. Strike one. Then came the dress. This was the centerpiece of my childhood dreams. I invited my mother, my sister Sarah, who was my maid of honor, and out of a sense of obligation, Eleanor. I should have known better. I found the one. It wasn't a massive, glittering ball gown. It was an elegant, A-line dress with delicate lace sleeves and a row of tiny, pearl buttons down the back. When I stepped out of the dressing room and saw my mother's tear-filled eyes, I felt that magic. I felt like a bride. I turned to Eleanor, hoping for a glimmer of approval. She was silent for a long moment, her eyes raking over me. "It's fine, I suppose," she said, loud enough for the consultant to hear. "If you're going for that understated, almost budget look. The lace looks a bit synthetic, don't you think? It will probably photograph poorly." The air in the little boutique turned to ice. My mother's smile faltered. My own joy shriveled. I could feel my face burning, a hot flush of shame and anger. I bought the dress anyway, but a little of its magic had been tarnished. Every time I looked at it after that, I could hear her voice in my head. Budget look. Synthetic. The cuts kept coming, each one deeper than the last. The menu choices were pedestrian. The band we loved was unrefined. My guest list, composed of my loving, middle-class family and friends, was a subject of her thinly veiled horror. "Are you sure you want to invite all of your cousins?" she'd asked, looking over the list. "We need to make sure the guest list maintains a certain caliber." The implication was clear. My family was not up to her standards. These were the people who had raised me, who had supported me, who loved me unconditionally. And she spoke of them as if they were contaminants. With every criticism, I felt a piece of myself and a piece of my dream being chipped away. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, replaying her words, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and resentment. I'd look at Michael, sleeping peacefully beside me, and feel a surge of desperate loneliness. He didn't see it. He couldn't see it. He'd try to defend her, saying, "She's from a different generation, Ames. Her delivery is harsh, but I think she's just trying to help." Help! I wanted to scream. She's not helping. She's gutting me. She's trying to erase me from my own wedding. But I didn't scream. I smiled. I swallowed the insults. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. I told myself over and over that this was temporary. It was just the stress of the wedding. Once we were married, it would all be fine. I just had to get through the day. I had to protect my dream, even if it meant letting her poison the process. I was so focused on surviving the battle that I didn't realize I was losing the war. The week before the wedding was the worst. She insisted on hosting a pre-wedding family dinner at her house. Just my parents, my sister, and her closest family. It was meant to be an intimate gathering. It was an ambush. She seated my father, a retired history teacher and the kindest man I know, next to her brother, a corporate raider who only talked about his stock portfolio. She asked my mother, a nurse of 40 years, what her little job entailed. The entire evening was a masterclass in condescension. The final, most devastating blow came during dessert. My mother, trying to be friendly, brought up a funny story from my childhood. It was a sweet, harmless anecdote about me trying to marry our golden retriever in the backyard when I was 6. My family laughed, remembering. Eleanor didn't laugh. She waited for the chuckles to die down, then placed her fork on her plate with a delicate clink. "How charming," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It's so important to remember where we come from." Michael, of course, spent his summers attending leadership camps in Switzerland. It's fascinating how different people's preparations for the future can be. The room went completely, utterly silent. She had just compared me to a dog, and my childhood to a lesser form of breeding. She had done it in front of my parents. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look small. I saw the hurt in my mother's eyes, the way her smile froze and then collapsed. In that moment, something inside me broke. The part of me that was trying to keep the peace, the part that was making excuses for her, the part that was willing to absorb her cruelty for the sake of a perfect day, it just shattered. The dream was already ruined. The scrapbook was a book of fantasies. She wasn't just trying to control the wedding, she was trying to stamp out the very essence of who I was, where I came from. I excused myself from the table, my hands trembling. I walked to the bathroom, my reflection in the ornate, gilded mirror a stranger's face, pale, wide-eyed, and defeated. I felt a single, hot tear trace a path down my cheek. But then, as I stared into my own eyes, the sadness began to curdle. It slowly, surely, turned into something else. Something cold. Something hard. She thought she was winning. She thought she could break me, mold me, and my family into something she deemed acceptable, or discard us if we refused. She thought I was weak. She thought I would just sit there and take it forever. And as I stood there, under the cold light of her crystal chandelier, I decided she was wrong. I wouldn't fight her on her terms. I wouldn't cause a scene. Not yet. I would smile. I would be the perfect, pliant daughter-in-law. I would let her believe she had won. I would let her walk, smug and victorious, right up to the edge of the cliff. Because I finally understood. I couldn't protect my dream wedding from her. But I could damn well make sure she would remember it for the rest of her life. The day wouldn't just be about my union with Michael. It would be about her undoing. I thought I had seen the worst of her. But in that moment of chilling clarity, I realized the worst was what I was about to become to her. Part 2. The Art of Swallowing Fire. Leaving that dinner party was like surfacing from a deep, cold dive. I held my breath the entire car ride home, with Michael chattering away, completely oblivious. He thought the night had been a success.
See?
I told you they'd get along, he said, squeezing my hand. I just nodded, the smile on my face feeling like a mask carved from ice. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid that a torrent of rage and pain would pour out, a flood that might sweep him away. 2. The loneliness of that moment was profound. I was in a war he didn't even know was being waged. The next few days, the final run-up to the wedding, became my crucible. My new resolve was a fragile, secret thing, a sliver of ice in my heart. To protect it, I had to master the art of swallowing fire. I had to let Eleanor's words burn their way down my throat and show no sign of the pain. I became the epitome of grace and compliance. Amelia, darling, I've taken the liberty of adjusting the seating chart, she'd say over the phone. Your relatives from the suburbs might feel more comfortable tucked away in the back corner. They can have a better view of the gardens from there. The old me would have argued, defended, fought for my family's rightful place. The new me said, "That's so thoughtful of you, Eleanor. Thank you for taking care of it." I could feel her surprise through the phone line. She was expecting a fight. By yielding, I was disarming her, and it felt like a small, private victory. And the favors, she continued, emboldened by my submission. Those little bags of birdseed are quaint, but my guests are accustomed to something more refined. I've ordered some silver-plated letter openers. We'll put yours on your family's tables, of course. A little personal touch. The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. She was literally dividing our wedding guests into two classes, her silver-plated society friends and my birdseed family. Whatever you think is best, Eleanor, I said, my voice as smooth as silk. I hung up the phone, and my hand was shaking so violently I had to grip the edge of the counter. My sister, Sarah, who had come over to help me with final preparations, just stared at me. "Are you serious?" she whispered, her eyes wide with fury. "You're just going to let her walk all over you like that? Tucked away in the back corner?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I let the mask slip. She saw the cold fire in my eyes. "It's a strategy, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "You can't trap a predator by warning it that you've laid a snare. You have to play the wounded prey." She didn't fully understand, not yet, but she saw my determination. "What are you going to do, Ames?" "I don't know yet," I lied. But I did. A plan was beginning to form, hazy at first, but gaining terrifying clarity with every fresh insult she hurled my way. The struggle wasn't just with Eleanor, it was with myself. There were moments of profound doubt. Late at night, I'd lie awake, the weight of my secret plan pressing down on me. Was I becoming as cruel as she was? Was I about to ruin my own wedding day, the day I dreamed of, by turning it into an arena for revenge? I would look at Michael's sleeping face, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, and my heart would ache. He loved his mother. No matter how monstrous she was to me, she was still his mother. What I was planning to do would hurt him, too. It would shatter his idyllic image of his family and force him to choose a side. One afternoon, I almost broke. I was at my parents' house, picking up some family photos for a display table at the reception. My mother was there, humming to herself as she carefully wrapped each framed picture in tissue paper. She was wearing a beautiful, vintage lace dress in a soft, dusty rose color. It had been her mother's, my grandmother's, and she was so excited to wear it. "Do you think Eleanor will like it?" she asked, her voice laced with a heartbreaking insecurity that Eleanor had put there. "Mom, it's beautiful. You look beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. And it doesn't matter what Eleanor thinks. But it did matter. It mattered to her. I could see how desperately she wanted to be accepted by this new family for my sake. The sight of her, so full of love and quiet dignity, trying to appease a woman who held her in contempt, almost made me call the whole thing off. I would just endure it. I would swallow the fire forever if it meant protecting my mother from any more pain. That resolve lasted until the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a stuffy, old-world restaurant that was Eleanor's choice. The air was thick with the scent of old money and new hostilities. She was in her element, gliding between tables, bestowing her chilly smile upon her friends, and treating my family like staff. The flashpoint came when I was talking to Michael's aunt, a woman who seemed genuinely kind. We were laughing about something when Eleanor swept over to us. She placed a proprietary hand on my arm, her nails digging in just slightly. "Amelia, dear," she said, her voice a stage whisper that carried across the room. "You must be exhausted. All this planning, it's a lot for a girl like you to handle.
I do hope you get some rest.
We can't have you looking haggard in the photos tomorrow." She then turned to the aunt and said, with a conspiratorial wink, "Her family isn't used to events of this scale. It can be quite overwhelming." I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't just insulting me now. She was painting me as some fragile, incompetent commoner who was buckling under the pressure of her superior world. It was a performance, and I was her prop. But the final, unforgivable act of war happened later that evening. As people were leaving, my mother was standing near the coat check. Eleanor walked past her, holding a glass of red wine. I saw it happen as if in slow motion. Eleanor stumbled, a ridiculously theatrical, fake stumble, and the entire glass of dark red wine emptied itself down the front of my mother's vintage, dusty rose dress. A collective gasp went through the remaining guests. My mother just stood there, shocked, looking down at the ruin of her dress, her mother's dress. Eleanor brought a hand to her mouth in a pantomime of horror. "Oh, my goodness. I am so terribly clumsy," she exclaimed. "Mabel, is it? I am so sorry. Let me get you some club soda." But I was looking at Eleanor's eyes. And in that split second, before she composed her face into a mask of regret, I saw it. A flash of triumphant, reptilian glee. She had done it on purpose. It was a power play. A final, cruel stamp of dominance before the main event. She had marked my mother, defiled something precious to her, as a way of showing me who was in control. That was it. The last of my doubts, the last of my hesitation. evaporated in a blaze of cold, white-hot fury. My mother, who had never been anything but kind, who had worked tirelessly her whole life helping others, who was the gentlest soul I knew, this monster had deliberately hurt her, just to get at me. I rushed to my mother's side, ignoring Eleanor completely. "Mom, are you okay?" She was trying so hard not to cry. "It's fine, honey. It's an old dress. It was an accident." "No," I said, my voice low and steady as I looked directly at Eleanor over my mother's shoulder. "It wasn't." Eleanor's fake smile faltered. For the first time, she saw the new person I had become. The ice in my heart had spread, turning my entire being into a glacier. Unmovable, unstoppable, and incredibly dangerous. As I led my mother away to the restroom, I heard Michael rushing over, trying to smooth things over. "Mom's just a little clumsy sometimes, don't worry about it." In the quiet, sterile silence of that restaurant bathroom, as my mother sobbed softly and I dabbed at the dark red stain that would never come out, I realized the truth. The wedding wasn't the finish line. It was the battlefield. And Eleanor hadn't just given me a reason to fight. She had handed me the perfect weapon, her own naked, undeniable cruelty. The plan that had been hazy before was now crystal clear. I knew exactly what I had to do. Part 3. Forging the Spotlight. The night before my wedding, I didn't sleep. While Michael lay beside me, breathing the deep, untroubled sleep of the righteous, I sat by the window, bathed in the cool, blue light of the moon. The rage from the rehearsal dinner had cooled, solidifying into something far more potent: purpose. There was no more turmoil, no more doubt. There was only the quiet, methodical process of forging the spotlight I would use to incinerate Eleanor's world. My first call was to my sister, Sarah. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Ames? How's Mom?" I heard what happened. "Mom's okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "She's heartbroken about the dress, but she's more worried about me." "But Sarah, I need your help. I'm going to do something tomorrow." I laid out the plan. It was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. It relied not on my anger, but on Eleanor's arrogance. I knew, with absolute certainty, that she would not be able to resist taking a victory lap during the reception.
She would want to give a speech.
She would see it as her right, as the mother of the groom, to stand before our families and put her final, authoritative stamp on the proceedings. And in that speech, she would try to diminish me one last time. "She thinks she's taking the stage," I told Sarah, "but we're building her gallows." The plan had two critical components. The first was my own speech. I spent the next 2 hours with a notebook and pen, not writing a speech, but creating an inventory. An inventory of every insult, every backhanded compliment, every calculated act of cruelty from the past 6 months. That understated, almost budget look. "Are you planning to have livestock as guests?" Her family isn't used to events of this scale. The seating chart, the letter openers, the comparison of my childhood to a dog's. I wrote them all down, the words like venom being drawn from a wound. I wasn't just documenting facts, I was collecting ammunition. I structured my response carefully. I wouldn't scream or cry. I would be calm. I would be surgical. I would use the language of therapy and polite society against her, twisting her own weapons back on her. I would thank her. I would praise her honesty. And then I would methodically, fact by painful fact, expose her. The second and most crucial component was the audience. Not just the 200 people in the room, but the world. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and intense, "I need you to record her toast."
And mine.
But you can't be obvious about it. Prop your phone up on the table, behind the centerpiece. Make sure the angle is good. And the moment it's over, I mean the second I sit down, I need you to send that video to a list of people. This was the masterstroke. It wasn't enough for the people in the room to know. I wanted her entire social circle to see her for who she was, unfiltered. I had, over the past few months, discreetly paid attention to the names she dropped: the chairwoman of her charity board, the editor of the local society pages, her gossipy tennis partners. A little searching online gave me everything I needed. And Sarah, I added, I need you to send it to Michael's cousins. The younger ones. The ones who live on social media. I knew what would happen. A video that shocking, that raw, wouldn't stay in a private message for long. It would spread like wildfire. We weren't just creating evidence, we were lighting a fuse. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Amelia, Sarah finally said, her voice awed. This is brutal. She spilled red wine on Grandma's dress, Sarah. In front of everyone. She called our family simpletons. Brutal is a language she understands. My wedding day dawned bright and beautiful, a cruel mockery of the storm brewing inside me. Going through the motions was an out-of-body experience. The hair, the makeup, putting on the dress, my budget dress. As my mother helped me with the final pearl button, she looked at my reflection in the mirror, her eyes sad. Don't let her ruin this day for you, sweetheart, she whispered. She won't. I promised, meeting her gaze. I'm not going to let her ruin anything, ever again. Walking down the aisle was the hardest part. I saw Michael standing at the altar, his face lit up with so much love it almost broke my resolve. He was innocent in all of this. He was a good man who loved a bad mother. For a terrifying second I faltered. Was I about to destroy his happiness along with her reputation? But then, my eyes drifted to the front row. And I saw her. Eleanor, dressed in a pale champagne-colored gown that was perilously close to white, looking for all the world like the Queen Mother. She caught my eye and gave me a small, tight smile that was pure condescension. I won, the smile said. This is my day, my son, my world. You're just a temporary guest. And just like that, the ice reformed in my veins. This wasn't just for me. It was for my parents. It was for every person she had ever looked down on. It was for Michael, too, though he didn't know it yet. He deserved to be free from her toxic influence. I said my vows, and I meant every word. My love for Michael was the one pure, untouched thing in all of this, and I held on to it like a life raft. When he kissed me, the applause from our guests felt distant, like the roar of a faraway ocean. The ceremony was over. The performance was about to begin. The reception was a blur of champagne, congratulations, and forced smiles. I could feel Eleanor's eyes on me constantly. She was watching, waiting for a crack in my composure. I gave her nothing. I danced with my father. I laughed with my friends. I played the part of the blissful bride to perfection. I was lulling her into a false sense of absolute security. I wanted her to be at the peak of her arrogance when the trap sprung. After the main course, the clinking of a glass against a microphone silenced the room. The MC announced that the mother of the groom would like to say a few words. This was it. Eleanor rose from her seat, radiating smug satisfaction. She held her champagne flute like a scepter. I caught Sarah's eye across the room. She gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. Her phone was in position. It was recording. Michael squeezed my hand under the table. This will be nice, he whispered to me. I felt a pang of sorrow for the boy he had been, for the man who still couldn't see the monster hiding in plain sight. It will be memorable, I whispered back. Eleanor beamed at the crowd, her voice resonating with false warmth. I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate Michael and his new bride. The pause was infinitesimal, but I felt it. The way she separated him from me. The show had begun. She took a sip of champagne, scanned the room, and then fixed her gaze directly on my parents. She sealed her own fate with her next sentence. And all I had to do was wait for the applause to die down so I could deliver the closing act. Part 4. The Unveiling. Eleanor stood there, basking in the silence she had commanded. The spotlight was hers, and she intended to use every second of it. She started with a few pleasantries about her wonderful son, Michael, how proud she was of the man he'd become, the company he kept, the life he had built. It was all a preamble, the careful positioning of her pieces on the board before the checkmate she believed she was about to deliver. A wedding, she began, her voice taking on a philosophical, condescending tone, is more than just a union of two people. It is a merger of families, of histories, of standards. She let that word hang in the air. It's about bringing someone new into the fold and hoping they can rise to the occasion. My hand was ice cold in Michael's.
He still didn't get it.
He was smiling, nodding slightly, thinking his mother was giving a generic, slightly stuffy speech. But I heard the code. So did my family. I could see my father's jaw tighten. I saw my sister's knuckles turn white as she gripped her fork. Then, Eleanor turned her attention and her venom directly toward my family's table. And today, we welcome Amelia's family into ours, she said, her smile as sharp as glass. They are good, simple people. Hardworking, I'm sure. And I have to say, it takes a certain kind of courage for people so ordinary to sit in a room like this, surrounded by a level of success they have only ever read about. They should feel incredibly lucky and very proud that their daughter has managed to do so well for herself. Let us toast to Amelia for aiming high. The room didn't just go quiet. The silence was a physical thing. It dropped like a lead blanket, smothering all sound, all air. Every guest, from her society friends to my bewildered cousins, was frozen. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died in an instant. In that deafening void, the only sound I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. She had done it. She had actually done it. She stood there, in front of 200 people, and called my family unsophisticated peasants who had won the lottery through me. She had stripped them of their dignity with a smile on her face and a toast in her hand. I felt Michael's hand go rigid in mine. He finally heard it. The fog of lifelong denial was pierced by the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of her words. He turned to me, his face a mask of confusion and horror. What did she just say? My face was burning. A wave of pure, hot humiliation washed over me. For a split second, the old me wanted to shrink, to disappear under the table, to simply die of shame. But then I looked past Michael and saw my mother. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she was holding her head high. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, I saw not shame, but love. Unconditional, unbreakable love. That was all I needed. The fire of shame was instantly extinguished by the ice of my resolve. I gently pulled my hand from Michael's. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of its legs on the floor echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. And I stood up. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. Eleanor faltered, her smug smile flickering for the first time. This was not part of her script. My voice trembled on the first few words, but I locked my eyes on hers, and it grew stronger with every syllable. Thank you, Eleanor. I began, my voice clear and carrying across the room. Thank you for that remarkably honest speech. It's not often one gets to hear what their mother-in-law truly thinks, spoken so plainly and publicly. It's a rare, if somewhat bracing, gift. A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. I picked up my own glass of water. You're right, I continued, my voice gaining power. A wedding is about honesty. And since you've opened the door, I feel I should honor that spirit of candor. For months, I have been the grateful recipient of your guidance. And I think all of our guests deserve to understand the depth of your generosity. I took a breath. This was it. The point of no return. I want to thank you for your honest feedback on my wedding dress, which you so aptly described in the boutique as having a cheap, budget look. I appreciate you keeping me humble. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. The color began to drain from her face. I want to thank you for your concern about our original venue choice, the barn. Your question, are you planning to have livestock as guests, really helped us reconsider and aim for the certain level of decorum you felt my family and I lacked. The murmurs in the room were growing louder. People were shifting in their seats, turning to look at Eleanor not with confusion, but with dawning comprehension. And how can I forget your thoughtful curation of our guest list and party favors? I went on, my voice ringing with cold, clear precision. The decision to seat my ordinary family in a corner and to provide them with different gifts than your more refined friends was a masterclass in social etiquette. Thank you for teaching me that some guests are simply more valuable than others. Eleanor was white as a sheet. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked at Michael, pleadingly, but he was staring at her as if he'd never seen her before. I saved the best for last. And finally, I said, my gaze sweeping over to my parents, who were watching me with expressions of pure shock and dawning pride. I want to thank you for what you did last night. For showing my mother, by ruining her vintage dress with red wine, that some things and some people are just not meant to be in a world as pristine as yours. It was the final, clearest lesson of all. I raised my glass of water. So, yes, let's all toast. Not to me for aiming high, but to Eleanor, for her honesty, for her integrity, for showing everyone in this room, beyond a shadow of a doubt, exactly who she is. Thank you for the unforgettable wedding gift, Eleanor. The truth. I took a sip of water and sat down. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It wasn't shock. It was judgment. Then slowly it started. On the far side of the room, one of Michael's cousins began to clap. Then another. Then my sister, my father, and soon, tables filled with our friends and family were applauding. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of support, of vindication. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment longer, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury. Then, she slammed her glass down on the table, turned, and fled the room. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Sarah had sent the video before Eleanor had even reached the exit. Michael's cousins, horrified and outraged, had blasted it across every social media platform imaginable. #wedding toast from hell started trending within the hour. By the next morning, Eleanor's perfectly curated world had crumbled to dust. The video was everywhere. The local news websites had picked it up. The society pages she so desperately courted were writing about her, but not in the way she had ever wanted. She wasn't the gracious matriarch anymore. She was a viral villain, a case study in cruelty. The chairwoman of her charity board called her to demand her resignation, citing conduct unbecoming of their organization. Her tennis club membership was quietly suspended. Invitations to galas and luncheons didn't just disappear. They were, I heard later, formally rescinded. Her friends, the silver-plated people she held in such high regard, shunned her. In her world, public image was everything, and I hadn't just cracked hers. I had vaporized it. She had built her identity on a foundation of perceived class and superiority. And with a few hundred words of her own making, I had simply held up a mirror and let the world see the ugly truth beneath. I and the aftermath. Michael and I had the hardest, most honest conversation of our lives. He was hurt, confused, and heartbroken. But he had been there. He had heard the words from her own mouth. He saw the glee in her eyes before I stood up. He finally saw the mother he loved and the monster I had been fighting. Our marriage didn't begin in a fairy tale. It began in the wreckage of a painful truth. But from that wreckage, we started to build something real, something strong, founded not on illusion, but on honesty. I never wanted a war. I just wanted a wedding. I wanted a day filled with love and peonies. But Eleanor wouldn't allow it. She couldn't stand to see me happy in a world she didn't control. She pushed and pushed, thinking I would break. But she didn't understand. You can't break something that's been forged in the fire of your own contempt. You only make it harder. You only make it sharper. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I didn't even need to lie. My revenge was simple. I just let her speak. I gave her the stage, the microphone, and the audience she so desperately craved. I guided the spotlight she had tried to shine on my family's ordinariness and turned it back on her, amplifying it 1,000 times over. She had tried to destroy my dignity, but in the end, it was her own reputation that crumbled to ash, burned by the heat of her own malice. And standing beside my husband, surrounded by the true, unconditional love of my family, I realized my trap had worked. The cat was in the cage, and the mouse was finally free. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's best served publicly, in a room full of witnesses, with a side of irrefutable video evidence. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt underestimated or disrespected, I hope this gives you a sense of vindication. What do you think? Was the public unveiling the right move, or was there another way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories about justice finally being served, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people show you exactly who they are.